Welcome back to the show. I'm here with Pete Freitag, or Freitag. How do you say your name, Pete?
So in German, it means Friday. So probably if you want to go with that pronunciation, it'd be Freitag.
Freitag. But in America, we
say Freitag.
Freitag. All right. And he's the founder of Foundeo. That sounds very, founder of Foundeo. But he's a ColdFusion security expert. He's creator of FuseGuard and HackMyCF. And not surprisingly, we're going to be talking about secrets of high-security ColdFusion Code today on the CF Alive Podcast. And we're live here at Into the Box, which is why we're on the same piece of video real estate here. So coming up in this episode, we're going to be looking at why you should even care about securing your ColdFusion code and what the common misconception is about website security. And how long does it typically take between a site being hacked and discovering the hack? How you should get started securing your CF code? And some versions of ColdFusion more than others, and why is that the case? We'll also look at how the eval and IIF functions may be letting hackers into your site, how file uploads can be dangerous, why storing API keys in your code is a terrible idea, and I think some of us here may have done that, so I'm going to learn why not to do that. ColdFusion Session hijacking, and isn't it a bad idea to document all these security holes on the public web? How ColdFusion security compares to Ruby on Rails, PHP, and Java security, and other ways other than your ColdFusion code that people may be hacking into your server. And we'll also, if we have time, touch on all the modern things that are being done in SSL, and have a look at FuseGuard and HackMyCF, which Pete's company makes. So welcome, Pete.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
So let's just start right at the top. Why should someone even care about security in their ColdFusion code?
Well, it's something that's a very important topic that you know, if you've got security vulnerabilities within your code base, eventually at some point you're probably, if you don't address them, you might find out the hard way, which is a really horrible thing to have to go through, having somebody hack your server and potentially all the potential things that they might be able to do. Could be, you know, deleting important assets that are difficult to recover, corrupting databases that might be very difficult to restore back to a reasonable state. So there's just all sorts of things that an attacker could potentially do to your applications, and it can really be a costly problem for you to recover from. So it's something that's really important to take a look at. The difficult thing about security, though, is that it's one of those kind of features that's hidden. Your users can't see, you know, that the code's more secure, but it's something that can sometimes be a tough sell to maybe a manager or whoever's, you know, paying the bill for the work to be done, to actually, you know, spend some time doing security review or improving the security of your servers or your code base. So
it's a bit like buying car insurance. Until you actually need it, it seems a waste of money, and then tens of thousands or millions of dollars in cost later, it seemed like an incredibly good idea.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And they not only may destroy your data, they might take confidential information.
Yep.
They might hold your site to ransom. Could be all kinds of crazy stuff. In fact, maybe they even put wares or pornography on your site and cause a reputation problem.
Yep.
So,
yeah, there's just almost no limit to what kind of harm could be done with security vulnerabilities these days.
So what's the most common misconception people have about website security?
I think maybe that there's an absolute security, that you can be at a point where, okay, if I just do 1, 2, 3, I'm secure. If I, for example, if I put a SSL certificate on my website, all right, now we're secure. So the security is just constantly changing. So there's always new practices that you need to do to make sure you're secure. So it can be difficult to stay on top of that. So one thing to make sure you're doing is just constantly learning about security, seeking advice of other people that know about security, and trying to stay up to date as much as possible about security. I think that can be a tough problem or a misconception that, okay, we I did what I think I know is going to make me secure, so now I'm secure. But there's almost always something else that you could be or should be doing.
Do you mean to say that hackers don't stand still? They're always improving.
They're always looking for a different different way in. As soon as something gets patched, they're already looking, or maybe already have another vulnerability that they're able to exploit for a different purpose. So it's a constantly changing, evolving problem that always needs attention.
It's like a competition between the security side of things and the hacker side of things. So I'm kind of curious, and you've looked at thousands of sites yourself and through all the tools you have. Typically how long does it take between a site being hacked and people discovering the site is being hacked? And I'm interested in that because I think some of the people listening may think, oh yeah, I've never been hacked. But in reality, some of our listeners have been hacked and haven't discovered it yet.
So I run across this from time to time where I have a client that maybe they've just realized that they had an attack for one reason or another, but the exploit that the attacker was using was maybe a file that was placed on the server like 1 or 2 years ago, or even
1 or 2 years.
Could be something that's been there for a long time that they hadn't realized was there, and has been open for exploit. So especially one in particular is the like that CFIDE h.cfm file that was kind of mass deploy, or servers were kind of mass hacked all around at the same point in time, and a lot of people were able to react to that quickly and get it taken care of. But then I still come across people that didn't realize they had it on their server, and they might still have it on their server. So it really depends on the situation. In some cases, you'll know right away, depending on what the attacker's doing. In other cases, maybe something just gets placed on your server that is there for the attacker to use whenever they want to at some point.
Wow.
So it can depend quite a bit.
And then you only discover it when it has side effects.
Right, when it causes a problem, you might notice. Like, for example, filling up the disk space, of the server if they're uploading all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that one. So how can people get started in securing their ColdFusion code?
Okay, so this is kind of what my into the box talk is going to be focused on tomorrow, and so when we work with ColdFusion code bases, you find that most of them aren't, brand new code that's or green code, they sometimes call it, that was just written. A lot of it's been around for a few years. It's not uncommon for ColdFusion code bases to be around for 15 or more years. And you'll find that those code bases have been worked on by dozens of developers. There could be 10,000, 20,000 ColdFusion files. So if this is your code base that you're working on, it can be kind of like one of those tasks where you're like, I don't even know where to start. What am I going to do to, improve the security? If I fix one thing here or there, it's not going to make an overall difference. But so that's kind of how do you decide where to start? So basically, you've got to start somewhere. So I like to pick, kind of like prioritize what vulnerabilities I'd like to focus on. And so I'm going to start with ones that are maybe more critical, ones that are going to compromise the server itself. So for example, I might look at all the file upload code within the application and see, make sure that doesn't have any gaping holes in it that might allow the attacker to upload a CFM file or something like that.
So just clarify that again. If you allow file uploads, that could let someone upload any ColdFusion file if you have it
if
code
you
wrong?
haven't coded it properly. Yeah. So I'll go into a little more detail on that. So there's a couple things. I kind of have like 3 core rules when it comes to file uploads that and my first one is don't trust the MIME type. So the MIME type is what you might find in the accept attribute of the CF file tag. So it might say accept image / JPEG. So, and if you're looking at versions of ColdFusion prior to ColdFusion 10 that was used as what a lot of people thought was a security check, but it's really just looking at what the browser has sent to the server. So it's not at all a security check. It's just
a trust thing.
Yeah. It's just, it's not.
If they're being good guys, it would be the file type, but if they're hackers, it could be anything.
It could be anything. So if that was your only security check, then right there, the attacker could just simply upload a CFM file and then
do anything, really.
Yeah, full ColdFusion.
Delete files, read your data.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything that the ColdFusion user could do. So, and that's where it comes into the lockdown guide, where locking down servers is important as well, because when you can restrict what ColdFusion can do, that can also restrict what an attacker that might have had the ability to upload a file onto the server, what they can do. So if you can limit them to only maybe messing with your database instead of completely taking over the server itself, that might be a good thing. But yeah, so that's one rule, is the MIME type. Pay attention to that. The other problem I've seen a lot is that if your destination of your upload is under the web root, and then you're doing your validation check. So maybe you're aware that the MIME type isn't enough, and you're checking file extensions as well. So if you've uploaded to the destination, but then you check the file extension, there's a small, like maybe a few milliseconds of time where that file is actually under your web root before it gets deleted. And that's a window for attackers to be able to execute.
That's sneaky.
Yeah. So that's one that's actually has been exploited out there in the wild, and
because they have some software that uploads it and then immediately goes to that temporary file.
Yeah, in my presentation, I'll show an example. Super easy to do. Just a loop basically, and having two loops, one that uploads a file and one that hits
where the temporary file would be.
It to be, and then they've executed code.
Wow.
And then the third rule is to always check the file extension as well. So those are kind of three core rules. There's more you can do beyond that, but that as far as file uploads are what I focus on.
So, does it really make any difference what version of ColdFusion you're running, whether it's, the current version of Adobe ColdFusion or an earlier version or open source version?
Yeah, so it can make a big difference in terms of what problems are out there. So for one, if you're running ColdFusion 9 or below, that's been end of life for quite some time, which means
18 months, really, nearly.
Yeah. So there's no more security patches.
What does that mean? No more security patches?
That means there's vulnerabilities in it that are publicly known that are not patched.
They're never going to be patched.
Not going to be patched by Adobe. So, and then we've got ColdFusion 10 is going to reach that point next month in May 2017. Yeah. That's also reaching what they call end of course support.
Yeah.
I believe there's an extended support period that if you've got some sort of contract with Adobe, an extended support contract, I think they'll help you, kind of migrate to a more recent version. But I don't think there's any guarantee of security patches even for those people running extended support. It might be something they would provide if it's easy enough for them to do. But so it's really important in terms of just security patching, to make sure you've updated ColdFusion. Also, another one along with that is
and maybe people think no one runs ColdFusion 9 and 10, but our recent State of the Union survey showed nearly half the people are running 9 and 10.
Yeah,
which is amazing.
That's a big number that are probably hopefully looking at upgrading to a more recent version. Because what will happen is at some point, if there's some sort of like 0-day vulnerability in ColdFusion 10 or below, you're going to be stuck with a server that's exploitable. You don't know if that's going to happen for sure or not, but it's a little bit risky, I think, to continue running those versions. I
would say it's more than that. I mean, how often does the security hot patch come out for ColdFusion? Once every 3 months, maybe? Or?
Yeah, roughly quarterly, something like that.
I mean, it's not, there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
Which is a good thing that they patch it, but if you're on an older version, you're not
Yeah.
getting those patches anymore.
Exactly. And then so also the version of Java that you're using can also affect the security of your code. So there was, going back to, this is something that's patched in, I forget the exact version, Java 1.7 point something, where if you're doing path traversals, vulnerabilities within ColdFusion, if you had a null byte character, it would basically it basically opened up the range of what an attacker could do with that type of vulnerability to even more types of files. So there's certain patches that happen within Java itself. A lot of them tend to be focused around like HTTPS connection, things like that. But that's another thing that's good to keep up on.
Generally, patching all your software is a good idea.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at some of the code stuff. You mentioned that the eval function is a window for people to hack in.
Evaluate function in ColdFusion is something that you want to pay attention to in your code. Most cases, I find you don't need it. It was used a lot back in, say, like ColdFusion 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And the reason for that was there was no, the scopes weren't structures at that point. So you had to, if you wanted to kind of like dynamically have form variables passed in, you'd use the evaluate function through some sort of loop. And so I'll see a lot of that in old code bases. And the problem with that is if the evaluate function basically executes CFML
Any
statements.
CFML.
Yeah, not tags, but basically anything that could be in like a CF set tag, it can execute.
So any script, really.
Yeah, so you call file delete from
That would be handy if you were trying to script someone's
inside
machine.
evaluate. You could, any function you can think of basically could be
Creating fresh files with new naughty code in them.
Yeah, exactly. So any use of the evaluate function, you want to look in your code. So that's one of the high priority ones I'll look for when I do a code review is are you using evaluate function? And then in a lot of cases, it's really easy to fix too, because you can just use the square bracket notation instead. And like if it's the form scope, you just say form square bracket, the name of the value. And then it's not actually evaluating it as an expression. It's just
Well, this makes sense. I understand why you don't want to use evaluate, but what about the IIF function?
Yeah, so the IIF function does the same thing in the second and third arguments. It evaluates as an expression.
Sneaky.
Yeah. So and the workaround for that is if you've got ColdFusion 9 and up, which again, hopefully you do because it's
because you listened to the earlier point that it's a bad idea to have old versions.
Yeah. There's the ternary operator, which is like the question mark. So you can have a condition question mark, and then if it's true, you output this colon. If it's false, you output that. And there's other ways to work around the IF function, but the ternary operator is one that kind of matches the syntax, I think, most directly.
Wow. So what about, we have a lot of people use APIs in their code. Why is it a terrible idea to store your APIs directly in your code? Keys?
So that's something you'll see a lot is API keys, passwords, encryption keys used for encrypting data found directly in the code itself. So there's a number of reasons it's not a good idea. One reason is that the code probably is hopefully stored on version control, which opens, puts those API keys onto some other third party potentially, if you're using like GitHub or something like that. So that's if somebody's able to read files on your ColdFusion server, they're able to grab those keys. So there's a number of different ways you could protect those secrets. There's a lot of one I like is Amazon Web Services has a key management service. Azure, the Microsoft Azure platform has another one. I forget what it's called. Another key management service. And these, they use hardware security modules, which are very high-end hardware that that do encryption and for you, and they store their key directly in the hardware, and they're not accessible to the software at all. So there's and those getting access to a hardware security module prior to some of these new services that even are pretty new within the last year or two, I would say, was pretty costly, like, thousands of dollars just to have access to a hardware security module. And then you need two of them for redundancy. And so they've made these as cheap as like $1 a month, basically, to leverage Amazon's key management service. Plus there's some usage fees, like a penny per 10,000 calls or something like that. But it becomes relatively cheap way to improve the security of your secret management. And then there's a lot of other there's software you can utilize as well. One of them that comes to mind is called Vault from HashiCorp. There's one called Confident, KeyWiz. There's a bunch of software out there that you can use that provide an API to get your keys out of and store them securely for you.
So what about ColdFusion sessions? How, those can be hijacked, and
yeah.
Why is that a bad idea?
So session hijacking basically means that the attacker was able to figure out what the session ID values for a particular user. So when you think about the session ID, if somebody has the session ID for a user, they're essentially logged in as that user, right? So that you got to think about protecting those session IDs as much as possible. So that's really what defending against session hijacking is all about, protecting the session ID as much as possible. So there's a number of things you can do to mitigate that issue. One thing would be to call session rotate when a user logs in, and that what that does is rotates a new session identifier, and that prevents something called it's a way to get to session hijacking. It's called session fixation, and the way that works is, let's say I give you my laptop and you say, here, you want to log into your bank account, right? So I might know what the session ID is already because I had the browser open, and then that would allow me to take it. So a more practical way that might work would be somebody might send you a link with the session IDs in it. So when you rotate the session IDs on a valid login, that prevents that type of attack. And then invalidating the session IDs when somebody logs out is another good practice. You can use the session invalidate function to do that, and then the session rotate function handles rotating. And then in terms of protecting the session identifiers, really the best way is probably to use the cookies. Don't pass them around in URLs, because URLs, probably the biggest problem is that users will copy and paste URLs, and so they'll send them to coworkers, and then their coworkers logged in as the wrong person.
I can't help thinking that if we just got rid of the users, everything would be a lot more secure.
Exactly.
Just joking, guys. Yeah. So I know on your site you document thousands of different security holes and what to do about them. Isn't it a bad idea to put this stuff on the public web, Pete?
Well, I think I am cautious about when I post something, but I think only as a developer, especially for like a coding security thing, if you don't know about it, how are you going to fix it in your code? So at some point you need to be able to make sure your code is protected against these things that the attackers are going to figure out.
They already know what the hackers already have this stuff figured out.
Exactly.
They're not the ones it's the developers who need to find this stuff.
So it's important to be able to find this stuff and know what to protect against, because if you don't know what a session fixation attack is, how are you going to defend against it, right? So you got to have some knowledge about what the different types of attacks are as a developer, so that you can think about it while you're coding in order to defend against them.
So how does ColdFusion stack up against other languages like Ruby or PHP or Java for security?
I was at the Adobe ColdFusion Government Summit last week, and they they were comparing on one of their slides in the keynote that I don't have the exact numbers, but what they were showing is that the number of vulnerabilities in something like Ruby on Rails over the last few years has been kind of increasing a lot, whereas Adobe ColdFusion vulnerabilities in the server platform itself has been improving and decreasing the number of vulnerabilities. So, I think a lot of these issues that I talk about in my secure coding presentations, they're all issues that you'd have to defend against no matter what language you're using. There's still possibility of session hijacking, SQL injection, file upload issues in no matter what language you're writing in. So I think from a developer standpoint, ColdFusion's got a lot of built-in tools you can utilize to defend against some of these things. But
well, cool. That's good news that ColdFusion stacks up good against other languages for security. And I know Adobe's always focused on releasing hot fixes and dealing with and publicizing security issues.
Yeah, and they do have a good process with when it comes to security hot fixes. They make sure everything gets reviewed and addressed, which is a good thing. I don't know if you necessarily always have the same guarantee when you're using a different platform that doesn't have as disciplined of a security team working with it. So
so suppose you've made your code as secure as you can. What other ways might people hack into your CF server with?
So once your code you've done everything you can possibly do to secure the code, then you got to think about the actual server setup and configuration itself. So that's where things like following the lockdown guide is good to do. And the approach to the lockdown guide is really just to try to reduce the attack surface as much as possible. So if you're not using a feature, make sure it's turned off, disabled. And a lot of the URIs that ColdFusion might listen to by default, making sure that those are blocked on the web server level before getting into ColdFusion, running using minimal user permissions and things like that. So yeah, those are some of the different ways that.
And do you need to lock down IIS and SQL Server or MySQL and Windows?
Yeah. Each thing is going to have its own process to go through. IIS, starting with version 7, has a lot of good security features, I think, and I like the way that they kind of turned everything into like a little module. So it's like you only have to install what you're actually going to use, and you can leave a lot of the stuff turned off in IIS. So that's a good thing. But yeah, keeping your SQL Server set up properly with user permissions and all that. The Windows server itself, using things like two-factor authentication is great too, because that can protect against certain things like social engineering attacks where somebody might, give out password or something inadvertently.
I've heard that possibly users write passwords down on little yellow stickies and put them by their computer.
Definitely,
and then we'll give them out over the phone to someone who pretends to be from the IT department.
Yeah. I've gotten phone calls from Microsoft's what do they call it? Microsoft support.
Where they ask for your password.
Yeah, it's a scam.
Oh, yeah.
I told them I didn't have any.
Let alone phishing emails.
Yeah.
So, yeah, probably one of the weakest links is the human element here.
Yeah, definitely. So that's something to keep in mind. I think two-factor authentication is a good solution for that. A lot of times, or not always a perfect solution for every problem, but it can help in a lot of those situations.
So what about SSL? You mentioned earlier that sometimes people think that's enough, but it isn't. But what's good about SSL these days? What's changed in that?
So I think SSL is basically something that there's not a lot of reasons to not use it anymore these days, because for one, you can get certificates for free.
Mm-hmm.
Let's Encrypt.org. You can get a certificate that works in all the major browsers, and so that's no longer a roadblock. The other roadblock people had a lot of times was that when you're running HTTPS, you kind of needed a dedicated IP address. So that's not necessarily the case anymore either, due to the server name indication. The SNI is one of the TLS extensions or SSL extensions that has been part of browsers, I think, since, I forget what version first supports it, but probably like IE7 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not really something that you can, it is a roadblock anymore, because I think a very, very high percentage of users are going to be able to support server name indications. So you don't even need a dedicated IP address anymore necessarily to do SSL. So, and even in some cases, there's a site you could check out. I think it's HTTP versus HTTPS.org, but I'll get you the link to put in your notes. That shows kind of example of loading around 150 images, first over HTTP, and then they do it over HTTPS using HTTP version 2. And because of some of the features in that new protocol, where it can pipeline requests and say avoid repeating sending headers and things like that, you'll see that the HTTPS is actually faster than the HTTP version. In those cases. So, and
is there any hardware acceleration on
so that's
on SSL now? Or?
Yeah, a lot of the processors have built-in AES support in the processor,
and that's the encryption method used
protocols.
in it. Yeah.
For some of the protocols used in or ciphers used in SSL. So.
So tell us, you've got a product called FuseGuard, but why should someone be using that?
Let me explain first kind of what it does. So FuseGuard is a product that it's a web application firewall. It's written in ColdFusion, and it sits in your application.cfc or CFM file. And think of it basically on request start, before your code gets executed, FuseGuard runs and looks at the request coming in and looks for various malicious patterns, and then can log or block the request. So you might think, well, I do a pretty good job coding, I don't need something like that. But where it's good is it provides an additional layer of defense that can protect you maybe from something you didn't know existed. So it's good in that regard. And then HackMyCF is a product that makes requests to your ColdFusion server, looking for various configuration vulnerabilities and issues. It can determine if you're missing certain patches. And then there's even a file you can place on your server, which will give you even more detail into it to show like what version of Java the person's running and whether it needs to be updated. So it can give you a lot of information to help you keep updated on the security of your ColdFusion server.
So let me just ask a different question here, Pete. Why are you proud to use ColdFusion?
So ColdFusion is a great language for building web applications, websites. I've been using it, I don't know, I think since 98 maybe. So coming up on
19 years. Wow.
Yeah. I've been using it for quite a while, and it's always got the job done for me. I've found it to be a very productive language. It's a language I feel like has gotten better over the years. The scripting support, I'm enjoying using full script CFCs these days. So yeah, I'm enjoying using it still. I still find it productive. So
great. So what will it take to make ColdFusion even more alive this year?
I think more modules written in ColdFusion that people can utilize to do certain things, I think would be a good step forward for ColdFusion. Having used other, like say Node.js, that has a very robust ecosystem of packages that you can easily utilize. So I think that's something that ColdFusion could use a little bit more of that type of thing to help move it forward.
So what are you looking forward to into the box?
So I've been learning a lot already. I went to a Coldbox modules session, which I thought was really good. I learned about Preside CMS, which I did a lot of things I didn't know I could do, and also learned stuff about WebSockets so far. So there's a lot of great presenters. Ordis has done a great job innovating ColdFusion and pushing language forward with things like command box. And so I think even if you're not a Coldbox developer, there's still a lot you can get out of this conference.
Oh, it's far more than ColdBox.
Yeah.
I mean, just command box itself is like a whole new way of doing things, and that's totally free. And just lets you, I mean, it must be great for the code you have where you need to test against different versions.
Exactly,
you can just spin up a server in seconds.
Yep, I can spin up different versions of servers and test code. I can do that in continuous deployment environments as well and have it automatically run it on like 6 different servers. And so, yeah. And I don't know if you saw the CF Script Me website I built recently that will convert tag-based CFCs into CF script ones. I on the plane ride over here, I wrote a command box command that will convert, like you can give it a whole directory and it'll convert all the CFCs over to CFML script.
Wow.
CFCs. And so I'm still working on a few kinks in that, but hopefully I'll have that published soon this week.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So if people wanted to find out more about you, Pete, how could they find you?
So my company, Foundeo.com. My blog is PeteFreitag.com. I'm also on Twitter at PFreitag. So those are probably the 3 places you can reach out. I'm also on the CFML Slack channel. My username is Foundeo on there. So feel free to reach out to me in any of those channels.
Great. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Oh, thank you, Michael.